LeBron James has finally had enough of referee Scott Foster and has come out guns blazing. Turns out he isn't the only player who has come out to expose the referee. From James Harden,
I don't think he should be able to even, officiate our games anymore, honestly.
To Chris Paul.
Yeah, it's personal. Yeah, we had a situation some years ago, and it's personal. You know what I mean?
And even sport commentators.
Yeah, because Scott Foster has to stop, right?
What's even crazier is that Scott Foster has been implicated in cases where referees have been jailed for suspicious activities. Let me put you on game. The collision heard around the world. There is a moment in every sport, a single crystallizing moment, where two worlds that are supposed to operate on completely separate planes suddenly and violently collide. And on the night of May 20th, 2023, during Game 3 of the Western Conference Finals between the Los Angeles Lakers and the Denver Nuggets, that collision was not a metaphor. It was literal. It was flesh against flesh, bone against bone, and it left one of the most controversial referees in NBA history with blood dripping from his mouth and a joke that nobody is entirely sure was actually a joke. With just over a minute remaining in the second quarter, LeBron James was doing what LeBron James does, sprinting the floor in transition, eyes scanning for the next play. He turned his head briefly to receive a pass from D'Angelo Russell, and in that split second of looking away, his shoulder connected squarely with the face of crew chief Scott Foster. Foster's whistle, which was already in his mouth, drove into his lip on impact.
That should be a tech, honestly.
No, I didn't see him. I turned and went.
Austin Reeves, watching from the Lakers bench, immediately offered the most natural reaction in the building, calling for a technical foul on his own teammate, because in that moment, whether you were a fan, a player, or a commentator, you understood the gravity of what had just happened. LeBron James had just physically bloodied the single most polarizing referee in the entire National Basketball Association. And Foster's response? Well, that's where the story gets interesting.
Nah, I was trying to get out of your way.
Yeah, I was already in sprint mode. My bad.
All good. That's You've been wanting to do that for 25 years.
Now, on the surface, that quip, "you've been wanting to do that for 25 years, reads as harmless locker room banter between two men who have shared an NBA floor since LeBron was drafted in 2003. But when those words left Foster's bloodied mouth, they ignited a firestorm across social media that would not die, because the implication buried inside that joke is the same implication that has haunted Scott Foster for decades, that players, superstars, the very backbone of the league, want him gone. And the reasons stretch far beyond a single accidental shoulder. The collision itself was accidental. No foul was called, and both parties treated it with good humor. But the incident went viral, amassing millions of views, and the internet did what the internet does best. It connected dots. The memes poured in. The conspiracy threads mushroomed. And the central question that emerged was not whether LeBron meant to hit Foster, but rather why so many people were openly celebrating it. To truly understand why that question matters, you have to understand who Scott Foster is, what he represents, and why the man wearing jersey number 48 has become, in the eyes of millions, the single greatest threat to the integrity of the game. Foster joined the NBA officiating staff for the 1994-95 season and has since accumulated a resume that, on paper, is nothing short of extraordinary. As of the 2024-25 season, he had officiated 1,167 regular season games, 263 playoff games, and 26 NBA Finals games. He holds the record among active referees for the most playoff appearances and has worked 16 consecutive NBA Finals. By every institutional metric the league uses, Scott Foster is not just a referee, he is the referee, the one the NBA trusts with its biggest moments. But here is where the narrative fractures, because the players, the men whose sweat and blood and brilliance generate the billions, tell an entirely different story. In anonymous player polls conducted by the LA Times in 2016 and The Athletic in 2023, Foster was voted the worst referee in the NBA. Not second worst, not in the conversation, the worst. Over 25% of players surveyed in 2023 gave him that distinction, and when you start digging into why, the collision between LeBron and Foster stops looking like an accident and starts looking like a pressure valve that was always going to blow. James Harden, one of the most prolific scorers in league history, put it bluntly after a 2019 loss to the Lakers.
Scott Foster, man, he's I never really talk about officiating or anything like that, but just rude and arrogant.
Harden didn't stop there. He went on to describe a man who shuts down communication, who refuses to engage in the kind of back and forth that players and referees have relied on for decades to manage the emotional intensity of competition.
I mean, you aren't able to talk to him throughout the course of a game, and it's like, how do you build that relationship with officials?
Then he went even further, declaring something that almost never happens in professional sports, a player publicly stating that a specific referee should not be allowed to officiate his team's games.
Like, I don't think he should be able to even, officiate our games anymore, honestly.
And it wasn't just Harden. Chris Paul, Paul Pierce, Kyle Lowry, Damian Lillard, Rudy Gobert, the list of all-stars and future Hall of Famers who have publicly criticized Scott Foster reads like a who's who of basketball greatness. Gobert was fined $100,000 in 2024 after making a money gesture toward Foster during a game, implying the referees were influenced by gambling interests. Kelly Oubre Jr. yelled, "You're a horrible ref," directly at Foster in 2025, earning himself a fine. And then there is LeBron James himself, a man who has voiced frustrations with officiating throughout his career, not typically aimed at Foster specifically, but aimed at a system that Foster has come to represent. After a January 2023 loss to the Celtics, in which LeBron was visibly fouled by Jason Tatum on a potential game-winning drive with no call made, James reacted with visible fury, slamming the floor and later posting on social media, "And all year they keep telling me to my face on the court, I didn't see it, or it wasn't a foul. It's not making sense to me, seriously. Frustrating as hell, man." The NBA's own last 2-minute report later confirmed the missed call. The crew chief that night was Eric Lewis, not Foster, but the frustration was systemic, and Foster sits at the very center of that system. So when LeBron's shoulder connected with Foster's face on that May night in 2023, and Foster quipped that LeBron had been wanting to do it for 25 years, the real question was never about the collision. The real question was, what exactly has Scott Foster been doing for the last 30 years that has made every corner of the basketball world, from the greatest player alive to the fan watching from a bar stool, believe that something is deeply, fundamentally wrong? The answer to that question begins with 134 phone calls, a convicted felon named Tim Donaghy, and a scandal that the NBA desperately wanted you to forget. 134 phone calls and the ghost of Tim Donaghy. In 2007, the National Basketball Association was rocked by the single largest officiating scandal in the history of American professional sports. Tim Donaghy, a 13-year NBA referee, pleaded guilty to federal charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and transmitting wagering information. He admitted to betting on games he officiated and providing inside information to gamblers with connections to organized crime, including figures linked to the Gambino crime family. He served 15 months in federal prison and was banned from the NBA for life. But here is the detail that the league prayed would stay buried. During the exact window of Donaghy's admitted criminal activity, from October 2006 to April 2007, phone records revealed that Donaghy placed 134 calls to one specific colleague, Scott Foster. That was more calls than Donaghy made to his own bookie, 126. No other referee received more than 13 calls from Donaghy during that period, and the timing of those calls was suspicious. Many were short, under 2 minutes, and clustered immediately before or after Donaghy's calls to gamblers like James Batista. Now, Foster was investigated. He cooperated fully with the FBI and with the NBA's independent review conducted by attorney Lawrence Pedowitz, and the official conclusion was that the calls were personal in nature. Two friends catching up, discussing schedules, travel logistics, the normal chatter of colleagues who had known each other since their days working summer league games in the early 1990s. Foster himself addressed it years later, saying, "That's how we communicated in 2007, before widespread texting had replaced phone calls." No charges were ever filed against Scott Foster, not a single one. But that did not stop the questions from multiplying, because Tim Donaghy himself refused to let it go. In his 2009 memoir, Personal Foul, Donaghy alleged that the culture of NBA officiating was rotten from the inside, that referees routinely manipulated games at the league's direction to favor star players, extend profitable playoff series, and benefit larger markets. And in multiple interviews and podcast appearances, Donaghy has continued to point fingers. In a detailed interview, Donaghy broke down exactly how the system worked.
But what I did do was I knew what the league wanted the officials to call that night, and it would put a team or a player at an advantage or a disadvantage.
That admission is critical because it reveals something the NBA has never wanted to publicly acknowledge, that officiating directives from the league office can, and do, tilt the playing field. Donaghy took that institutional knowledge and weaponized it for personal gambling profit, but his broader claim was always that the mechanism for manipulation was already built into the system.
I was always making correct calls, but I knew what correct calls to make, pretty much, that we're going to put the crew was making that we're going to put a team at advantage or disadvantage.
And when asked specifically about which referees the NBA relies on to manage outcomes in high-stakes games, the so-called Game 6 guys and Game 7 guys, Donaghy did not hesitate to name names.
You know, it's tough. I don't know that really anyone's going to go out there and do what Pavetta did.
But then came the specific mention of the man at the center of our story.
But it seems like Foster and Mark Davis are on a lot of games, important games. Davis primarily for Game 6s, I think, and Foster seems to be on a lot of Game 7s.
Foster on Game 7s, the most do or die, highest stakes, maximum revenue games in the entire NBA calendar. And this is not just Donaghy's claim. The data backs it up. Since 2008, teams trailing 3-1 or 3-2 in a playoff series have won approximately 70% of games officiated by Foster, compared to the league average of 35 to 40%. That statistical anomaly is the foundation of Foster's most infamous nickname, the Extender, the man the NBA sends in when they need one more game, one more gate, one more television broadcast. Now, to be fair, some analysts have pushed back. A 2025 Reddit analysis examined Foster's record as the Extender since 2021 and found it had regressed to 21-21, 50%, right at the statistical baseline. And another study by Owen Phillips found that while Foster calls more fouls than any other referee, 2.31 more per 100 possessions than the league average, the distribution of those fouls is not dramatically one-sided. But here is what those numbers cannot account for: perception. And in the NBA, perception is everything. Because when Rasheed Wallace, a four-time All-Star and NBA champion, sits on a podcast and flatly calls Scott Foster a cheater, that is not a statistical aberration. That is a lived experience. Rasheed Wallace detailed on the Underdog NBA podcast how referees conspired to target certain players, calling Foster the company man and accusing him of being a tool the league uses to manufacture desired outcomes. And then there is the feud that has defined Foster's career more than any statistic ever could: his war with Chris Paul. Paul's teams are 3-17 in playoff games officiated by Foster, including a streak of 13 consecutive losses. Paul's overall playoff win percentage without Foster hovers around .564. With Foster, it craters to 105, and Paul has not been quiet about it.
Yeah, it's personal. Yeah, we had a situation some years ago, and it's personal. You know what I mean?
The situation Paul references involves his son. According to Gilbert Arenas, who spoke extensively about the feud on his podcast, the origin of the Paul-Foster conflict traces back to a parking lot incident after a game.
So in the situation with his son, I believe after a game, Lil Chris was playing in the tunnel. Scott Foster in the car with the other refs rolls up to him, like honks the horn at him, yells at him, "Get the f out the way."
An adult NBA referee in a car with his colleagues, allegedly screaming profanities at a child, Chris Paul's child. And from that point forward, the relationship between Paul and Foster was irreparably severed.
CP3 finds out about that naturally, like any of us would do it with our kids. Is not particularly happy about that. He also shed some light on some conversations they've had throughout the years with Scott Foster, kind of just saying some before games.
And Arenas revealed that before major playoff games, Foster would reportedly taunt Paul about his losing record in games that Foster officiated.
Yeah, that playoff game, I think it was against the Spurs. When he went up to him and said, "Hey, you know you haven't won against me on closeout games?"
A referee taunting a player before a closeout game about his inability to win when that referee officiates. Let that sink in, because what Arenas described next illustrates why this conflict became an existential crisis for the league's credibility.
You see me mentally, and you know you can't beat me. That means, that's why I said it was bad for the league, because emotionally, you told the Suns, you.
Because by the time the 2021 NBA Finals rolled around, with Paul's Suns up 2-0 against the Bucks, the league made a decision that defied all logic, unless the logic was exactly what Foster's critics have always alleged.
When they played against Bucks in the final, it was up 2-0, and then game 3, they bring down Scott. Bring on the Kraken!
Wow.
Boom. Lost by 20.
The Suns lost Game 3 by 20 points when Foster entered the series. He returned for Game 6 as well, and according to Arenas, the reaction in the betting world was immediate and dramatic.
Do you know damn near all of America went with
Change their bet.
went with Bucks.
Yeah.
They took Bucks -4.
When the mere announcement of a referee's assignment can move Vegas lines, when a Change.org petition with thousands of signatures calls for that referee's removal, when an NBA champion and former player openly admits to changing his own bet upon seeing Foster's name, the question is no longer whether corruption exists. The question becomes, whose corruption is it? And that question leads us directly to Boston, the Celtics connection and the system that protects itself. If Scott Foster's name has become synonymous with the phrase the extender, there is another name that has quietly become synonymous with something arguably worse: favoritism toward a specific franchise. That franchise is the Boston Celtics. And the referee most directly connected to that allegation is not Scott Foster alone. It is his colleague, Eric Lewis, and the scandal that revealed just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Eric Lewis officiated in the NBA for 19 seasons, working 1,161 regular season games, 91 playoff games, and 6 NBA finals. He was one of the league's most trusted officials. And then, in May 2023, social media users uncovered something extraordinary. Lewis had been operating a secret Twitter burner account under the name Blair Cutliff. The account, which had 0 followers for most of its existence, was used almost exclusively to defend Lewis personally, dismiss accusations of referee bias, and argue with fans, particularly Lakers fans who accused him of favoring the Celtics. And here is where it connects to our story. Remember that January 28, 2023, game where LeBron drove to the basket, was clearly fouled by Jason Tatum, and no call was made. The crew chief that night was Eric Lewis. The NBA's last 2-minute report confirmed it was a missed foul. The Celtics won in overtime, and Lewis's burner account had a history of dismissing exactly these kinds of accusations, posting things like, "Lakers still blaming the refs, huh? Y'all played the #1 team in the NBA, and they don't get any credit." Lewis retired abruptly on August 30th, 2023, and the NBA closed its investigation. But the damage was done, because fans had already connected the dots. Boston went 36-2 in games Lewis officiated since 2020, per some fan analyses. And when you pair that with Foster's own record, the Celtics going 73-60 overall in regular season games he officiated, including 6-0 in the 2023-24 season, a pattern begins to emerge that is difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Tim Donaghy himself made this connection long before the burner account scandal. In a podcast interview, he directly addressed the intersection of referee allegiances and team outcomes.
I know Eric Lewis, his crew missed a pivotal call that went against LeBron James at the end of the game last week.
Then Donaghy connected it to the broader pattern of Celtics favoring outcomes.
They said that he's like 20-2 when he referees the Celtics games.
And then he explained how these relationships function, not through explicit match fixing, but through the subtle mechanics of human relationships and institutional incentive.
You know, it's a situation where, you know, there's favorites, or he may know somebody off the floor that's on that team, and, you know, they're getting the benefit of, some calls.
This is the architecture of the accusation. Not that referees are receiving brown envelopes before tip-off, but that the NBA system of assignments, evaluations, and professional incentives creates an environment where conscious and unconscious biases flourish unchecked. A referee who calls games in a way that extends series generates more playoff revenue and gets rewarded with more high-profile assignments. A referee who has personal connections to a franchise's staff or ownership can shade calls without ever making a single decision that looks wrong on instant replay. And the league's response to all of this? In December 2025, the NBA reinstated Eric Lewis as a G League official, giving him a path back to the NBA. Byron Spruell, the NBA's president of league operations, described it as a progressive path, not a punitive one. Lewis, the man with the burner account, the man who oversaw one of the most controversial non-calls in recent NBA history, was being welcomed back into the fold. Meanwhile, Scott Foster continues to officiate the league's biggest games. In 2025, he worked Game 4 of the Thunder Pacers NBA Finals, a game that featured 53 total fouls and missed calls that drew widespread outrage. Pacers coach Rick Carlisle, despite being a longtime Foster acquaintance, could not hide his frustration. And the fans? The fans have long since moved past frustration into something far more dangerous for the league: resignation. A belief that this is simply how it works, that the system is designed to protect itself, not the game. Kendrick Perkins, the former NBA champion turned analyst, captured the sentiment perfectly after Foster ejected Chris Paul in a 2023 regular season game.
Yeah, because like Scott Foster has to stop, right? And I know it takes two to tango, and I know that CP wasn't the same in this.
Because for Perkins, and for millions of fans watching, the question is no longer about one game, one call, or one collision in the second quarter.
Right there was like zero tolerance, and it comes to a point where you have to ask yourself, when are When is Scott Foster gonna start being held accountable?
And that, when does Scott Foster start being held accountable, is the question that the NBA has refused to answer for over 2 decades, despite 134 phone calls to a convicted match fixer, despite being voted the worst referee in the league by the very players he officiates, despite a statistical pattern that has moved betting lines, despite an open feud with one of the greatest point guards in history, despite the burner account scandal of his colleague, despite a petition calling for his removal, despite viral hoaxes about his suspension that fans believed because they wanted them to be true. Despite all of it, Scott Foster remains. And that permanence, that immovable institutional permanence, might be the most damning evidence of all. Not because it proves corruption, but because it proves something the league fears even more, that it does not matter whether Foster is guilty or innocent. What matters is that the system that employs him, evaluates him, assigns him, and protects him has lost the trust of the people who fund it, the players, the fans, and yes, even the greatest basketball player who has ever lived, a man who, on a warm May night in Los Angeles, ran full speed into the face of that system and drew blood. Gilbert Arenas said it best when he laid out the impossible position the league has created for itself.
They want to keep trying to pretend that there's nothing going on.
And then the damning follow-up.
So if you penalize him, then it shows that Chris Paul has been right? We all know now.
That is the trap. If the NBA removes Foster, it validates every accusation that has ever been made. If it keeps him, the accusations only grow louder. And in the middle of it all stands LeBron James, a man who has never publicly accused Scott Foster of corruption, but whose career has been shaped, shadowed, and in some ways defined by the officiating controversies that Foster embodies. A man who, in running into Foster and drawing blood, did something that no amount of press conferences, fines, or petitions has ever accomplished. He made the whole world look. And now that we are all looking, the question is not whether Scott Foster will be held accountable. The question is whether the NBA is capable of holding itself accountable. Because until it does, every whistle, every foul call, every playoff assignment will carry the same asterisk. And that asterisk is not going away. If you enjoyed this video, click on the boxes playing on your screen to watch similar content.